BionicDance is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
So back when I started the channel Essence of Thought in 2011, things seemed a lot simpler. People in the vaguely defined atheist community just sort of did their own thing. Sometimes interests would cross over, sometimes they wouldn't. But hey, that's fine, that was cool. You could go and do your thing, I could go and do my thing, and so long as there was a level of mutual respect, we could still work towards the common goal of secularism.
Problem. That's not necessarily a common goal within our atheist community. No, really, it's not. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. One thing I've avoided doing as much as I can is making videos about other atheists on YouTube. Camaraderie is usually more important than petty disagreements. But sometimes we do disagree, and sometimes quite strongly. This is the case with Essence of Thought's latest video about how being an atheist, or a secularist, is inherently political. And a misunderstanding was had in the comments section, so I thought it was a good idea to clarify in video form, and as civilly as I know how. Which is unfortunately not very, but I'll do my best. Now, those of you who've seen Essence of Thought's video will notice that I'm skipping a huge portion about elevator gate. If you're not familiar with that incident, it's okay. You won't need to in order to understand the larger topic, and addressing it will unnecessarily delay getting to my larger point.
And throughout all of this, a saying was born. Politics doesn't belong in the atheist community. Every time I'd bring up an issue of gender, politics doesn't belong in the atheist community. Every time I'd mention racism, politics doesn't belong in the atheist community. Every time I brought up trans rights as a trans person, part of the atheist community, politics doesn't belong in the atheist community.
I actually do disagree that politics don't belong in the atheist community. They do, but only when it actually relates to religion. Yes, religion, not atheism. When religious people are acting like the world belongs to them and try to pass laws to force conformity to their religious ideas and ideals, well, as I've said many times, as long as theists can share and play nicely with the other kids, I don't give a rat's ass what they believe. But when they get political, lock and load. However, Essence of Thought's video is titled, Dear Atheists, Secularism is Inherently Political, and that's where I begin to disagree, and quite strongly. Atheism and secularism can be political, but neither has to be.
So it seemed that what was being deemed as politics was anything a person felt didn't belong, rather than something with certain attributes that can be described, identified, and thus excluded. It was circular reasoning. This doesn't belong in the community. Why? Well, because it's political. How do we know it's political? Well, because it doesn't belong in the community.
I can't speak for other people, and I agree that what's described sounds kind of douchey, but I do have reasons why politics don't belong in the atheist community that are significantly less elliptical. About 6.5 years ago, there was an attempt to start a movement called Atheism Plus. Its goal was to move atheism past the question of non-belief and into realms like feminism, combating racism, homophobia, transphobia, social justice, etc. At the time, and still, I objected to the movement, not because I disagree with the stance is taken, I agree with them quite strongly, but because it was being done in the name of atheism. I objected to that because I felt it turned atheism into more than a stance on the issue of whether a god exists and into an identity. It gave atheism values, a moral stance. It played right into the hands of people who would point to atheism and call it a religion. Many theists have a religious lifestyle, not just beliefs. It's part of their world and who they are. But an atheist is just not religious. There is nothing more, and should be nothing more, than just having no God belief. Yes, defending ourselves against theists who would see us marginalized for not adopting religious values is when atheists should get political. But there is no other reason having no God belief should mandate a political position on any other issue. And that's why I think politics doesn't belong in the atheist community, because it turns a philosophical position into an identity.
But there's a greater flaw here, and that's the fact that there really isn't an atheist community per se. There's a group of atheists, many of whom have formed a secular community. Now I'm happy to use either atheist or secular community as synonyms, but it is the latter, not the former, which is most accurate. We don't simply gather in non-worship of the non-God. We gather to build community so that we can support one another via secular means, ones which religious institutions have prevented us from doing for millennia. We pass on information to better inform and educate one another on the struggles we have and very likely will face. We mobilize into a political force, one which can push forward as a unified front to remove religion from state.
And that's another place where I disagree quite strongly. We don't do that. Only some of us do that. If you ask around, you'll find many atheists who need an atheist community, not for political reasons, not for removing church from state, but because they need comfort and support. Many, upon realizing they've lost their faith, don't know what to do or what to think. A huge part of their life has been uprooted. They're looking at the world and at their own existence through new eyes, and it can be confusing and depressing and scary. Others find their families objecting, disowning them, or mistreating them. And when they find an atheist community, there are people there to support them, comfort them, show them they're not alone. And politics never rears its head in the least. I've known at least a few people who've even left an atheist community or stopped posting atheism-related videos on YouTube because they found peace for themselves and had that catharsis. That's all they needed. Becoming an activist was never part of their atheism. So even aside from the question of whether politics belong in the atheist community, it's certainly not inherent to it. Politics is entirely optional.
Do you know how surreal it is to have people who are part of a community centered on state-church separation turn to you and tell you that politics doesn't belong in the very same community? Because I most certainly do. It's not simply a surreal experience, but an infuriating one. It's infuriating to me because it demonstrates a care only for oneself. They're happy fighting for equality when it's religious equality because that's what secularism is. For there to be true equality of religion, a person must first of all be free to make their own choice of religion or none.
Which, again, is not entirely a political issue. Even if we have complete church-state separation, there will still be the social aspects of religion, its absence, or its moral expectations. Theists don't need state support in order to act like chowderheads.
My dear fellow atheists, secularism is inherently political. You'll just have to learn to live with that fact.
No, it's the other way round. There are two different kinds of secularism. Philosophical secularism is a synonym for atheism, for non-belief. Well, essentially anyway. And there is the political church-state separation form of secularism. Not all atheists are part of the latter sort. Not all atheists are activists for the latter sort. And one need not be an atheist to also seek church-state separation, because not all theists think the world belongs to them and would seek the kind of equality being advocated here. One need not look too hard to find religious people who've advocated for secularism, like Martin Luther. The idea that politics is inherent, inseparable, must be part of the world of a secularist assumes too much about the views of those who self-identify as such. And you're just going to have to live with that fact. Thing is, we seem to agree politically, ideologically. We just don't agree on whose job it is to be advocates for those ideals. I still object to the idea of making these views an identity, making it who we are instead of a stance we've taken. It's like when creationists call us evolutionists, as if we're religious just like them, just another kind of believer, and that's what we are, who we are, instead of just a conclusion we've reached. You want to talk about what gets your hackles up? That one makes me grind my teeth. If you want to start a secular party like a Democrat or Republican Party, well, I can't stop you. But I still feel that it works against our self-interest to be identified as such, for it to be our name and not just our stance. And that's why I think that politics does not belong in the atheist community. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying, Actually, I think my usual ending tagline would be unnecessarily rude in this particular case, so I'll just say thanks for watching and considering another side on this issue.
Even YouTubers need Ferraris. Please donate on Patreon.